Welcome to what is the culmination of this phase of our public engagement process in our review of Vermont's renewable and clean electricity policies and programs. This workshop today is one of two that will be held today, both this morning and this evening, in reviewing the draft report on our initial takeaways from the public engagement and technical analyses. I appreciate you all coming. For those of you who don't know, my name is TJ Poor. I'm the Director of Regulated Utility Planning here at the Department of Public Service. We are an agency within the executive branch of government, and we represent the public interest in energy, telecom, water matters. We also have broad planning responsibilities, including the Comprehensive Energy Plan. And we wear another hat, and that is as the State Energy Office as designated by the Federal Department of Energy. A couple of weeks ago, after Thanksgiving, we published a draft summary of the process that we've taken to review our electricity policy and programs over the last 18 months or so. And the draft document is open for public review and comment until December 20th. This workshop is one of the ways that we can get we're trying to get feedback on the initial takeaways and reflections on the broad takeaways and the process included in that report. I'll note that there are not specific recommendations in that report as to the process leads us to answer X or answer Y. We still want to hear from the public on what we've heard, and wanted to make sure we've heard the public and took away the right general takeaways from the process. And so this is an opportunity not only to let us know if we heard something wrong, but also one final opportunity even to say something new if you have it. Today we'll do a quick welcome and just go over the Zoom etiquette. We'll talk a little bit about introduction and context for the work and the process, takeaways. We'll have a feedback and discussion period. This is a pretty small group, so hopeful that this can be conversational. I'll expect with Claire McElveny, our data and equity manager, the two of us will talk for about 20 minutes and then really have a conversation that will include a discussion on our 5 major takeaways from the process, some reflections on the process itself, and feedback broadly. And then at the end, we will, when we've exhausted conversation, or 2 hours, whichever comes first, we will wrap up and go over some next steps. So quickly, just some workshop logistics. Please remain muted with the video off for this introduction portion of the workshop. During this discussion periods, please feel free to turn on your video when participating. I think that's always helpful. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you could raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you. If you are more comfortable in the chat box, please direct chat questions to the co-host Adam Jacobs. He's an analyst, policy analyst here at the Department of Public Service. If you'd prefer not to speak, that's the way to do it. We've otherwise disabled the chat in previous Zoom meetings. We've found and gotten feedback that it was very distracting from the conversation. So we'll either converse together here, or if you want to submit a question, please direct it to Adam. There's closed captioning available. Those are auto-generated, and the workshop is being recorded. And as we've been doing throughout this process, we want to have track and measure who's here. And so if we do have a couple of questions through an easy Microsoft form here to better understand the demographics of who's here and the perspectives you're bringing to the table. This is a voluntary ask here to take the brief survey. All your responses will be anonymous. And we really use the data collected here internally to inform our outreach efforts going forward and in our reports on the process. This whole process, I think, has elevated our game around being transparent about who we did and did not, importantly, hear from, and to improve in the future and offer context for ultimate recommendations. So you can use the QR code here on the screen. I think Adam put into the chat a link to the survey. I'm just going to pause for one moment to give you a chance to do that. So thank you again. This does really help us. We look at the data anonymously and work to improve our outreach and our presentations based on the feedback. So I think as you fill that out, you can continue to fill that out. I want to now turn it to Claire McElvany, Data and Equity Manager here at the Department of Public Service, to provide some context. Go ahead, Claire.
Thanks, TJ. Yeah, so just wanted to provide some brief context around sort of the process why we're doing this work in the first place, and the process that has led us up to this point today to be discussing kind of the draft report. And really the two main motivators for this body of work were recommendations that came out of the 2022 Comprehensive Energy Plan, 2021 Climate Action Plan, both making recommendations to consider adjustments to the renewable energy standard, looking at moving towards either 100% low carbon or renewable energy standard. And the CEP in particular, Comprehensive Energy Plan, emphasized doing so in a transparent and open way. And I think that really stemmed from the fact that both of the processes taken to develop these plans included public engagement aspects, and felt like sort of reflecting on those, there was much we could learn about how we more inclusively and comprehensively engage with the public, not just at sort of the recommendation phase of these efforts, but through the whole life cycle of the process. Which led us to the process that we've taken over the past really year and a half to engage with the public to review our existing policies and programs in the electric sector and think about how we move forward. So we really started thinking about this, in spring of 2022, of how we would craft a process that led to a sort of request for input that we issued that summer, asking a lot of different questions, and particularly around the stakeholder engagement process that folks would like to see to inform any recommendations or the review of policies and programs. That led to the release of our public engagement plan in December of 2022 that outlined this three-phased approach to engaging with the public that we have been implementing since. And that those three phases have sort of been structured around initially sort of raising awareness of the process and building some capacity to engage in these conversations, a phase dedicated to policy and program review specifically, and then where we are today, sort of moving into our third phase of developing key takeaways, recommendations, and final report. So that we don't have time today to go in depth into each of the things that we did during these processes. We do have summaries of what we did and who we engaged in the full report, but just to give a quick overview before handing it back to TJ to cover some of the key takeaways. Phase one, we had our three-part webinar series that really focused on raising awareness of this effort. We had a webinar on, talking about where Vermont's electricity comes from, our current policies and programs, and then a topic we got a lot of questions on, renewable energy credits and their markets. And the information in that webinar series really formed, I think, a foundation for a lot of the work that came after. We worked with MassInc Polling Group to do a statewide poll of 700 Vermonters around what they felt we should be prioritizing when thinking about where electricity comes from, and preferences for different sources of that electricity. That then led into 11 focus groups, also with Massing Polling Group, a combination of virtual and in-person that continued conversations on those topics and also involved a kind of follow-up survey to see if engaging in conversations on those topics changed anyone's opinions about priorities for electricity or preferred sources, and also began asking about some policy questions and where we go from here. We also followed that up with a partnership with our 11 regional planning commissions, where we held about 21 engagement opportunities from mid-September through October, distributed across the state, asking very similar questions through dedicated sort of workshop or listening session type events, but also tabling at community events and some follow-up surveys. And then also conducted a technical analysis where we worked in partnership with Sustainable Energy Advantage, and we have Jason Gifford from SEA here today to help with any technical questions that come up. And a stakeholder advisory group that we convene through a public nomination process to help us craft an analysis that looked at sort of 6 core scenarios of how we might modify our current renewable energy standard and potential impacts across a variety of issues. And have been hosting also a monthly newsletter to keep everyone up to date on that. So that has culminated in a lot of different materials, and this report that we released last week kind of works to look across that body of engagement and technical analyses to distill some overarching key takeaways, which I'm going to hand it back to TJ to walk through.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm really just going to go really briefly over these key learnings that were in the draft report. I'm also putting in the chat box, hopefully you can see that, the link to the full report, or where you can find the full report. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look, and this is just a summary to stoke discussion in a few minutes here. So the first key learning we've identified really is that affordability, reducing carbon emissions, and reliability were consistently highlighted as the most important issues to prioritize, the highest priorities for Vermonters. These items came up continually over the different engagement avenues, whether it was the statewide polling, focus groups that we had, both of those kind of randomly selected sample of Vermonters, or regional discussions through the Regional Planning Commission events that were held. We also heard this, from the stakeholder advisory group, and that. We'll go to the next one. So a move toward, I think there's one of the next key learnings is that there's really a trade-off between societal benefits and ratepayer costs. So in the technical analysis, most, if not all, of the scenarios we evaluated, there was a societal net benefit for making changes to increase requirements under the renewable energy standard, and there was a ratepayer cost. And that really raises 2 more questions, right? It's how can we mitigate those costs while still maintaining benefits, and how much are Vermonters willing to pay for societal benefits? And those are the trade-offs that are identified and that we need to grapple with as we go forward and discuss where to place emphasis. Next, there's really general support for solar, wind, and hydropower as sources of electricity. There was support for nuclear and biomass as well by a majority of Vermonters, although those resources, the support was much more mixed. So what that means is that I think there's interest in a diversity of resources to meet our electricity needs. We'll go to the next one. in a lot of our discussions and engagement, we found that many Vermonters are at least somewhat supportive of changes that increase requirements for low carbon and renewable electricity, and doing it in a way that supports the most vulnerable Vermonters. We've heard a lot about access to renewable energy. Community solar is not well defined, just in general in the industry and not in this process, but there was a lot of support for community solar, and that, I think that meant different things to different people, but that zooming back out at a high level, it really is access for Vermonters and communities to renewable energy and the energy transition. And finally, as we move forward and consider achieving 100% renewable or low carbon electricity and increases to new renewable electricity requirements, those considerations need to also look at a more granular understanding, more granular than an annual basis. So either a seasonal or monthly or hourly understanding of the alignment of renewable generation and the demand for electricity. So when the electricity is generated, if it's generated in the summer and our demand is in the winter, there's a mismatch. How do we minimize that mismatch, and what are the other implications of that for transmission and distribution system, and then also cost in the wholesale energy markets? So those are the 5 key learnings that were identified in the report. As we discuss going forward, we can, as necessary, pull up slides from the full report if it makes sense to do so. But before we get further into discussion, I want to turn it back to Claire to talk a little bit about our learnings about the process that we undertook, which was pretty new for us.
Thanks, TJ. Yeah, we're clearly still engaging in the process and with our stakeholders as we are here today. But again, throughout this process, we've really tried to rethink how we comprehensively engage with folks throughout the life cycle of policy recommendation development, and in a diverse variety of ways. So this initial draft report includes some reflections on what we think went well and where we've learned some lessons and think there's room for improvement in the future. Definitely not an exhaustive list, but in terms of what we think went particularly well, we really tried to center public engagement, as noted in this first bullet, throughout the whole process, which gave us a number of opportunities to engage more meaningfully with Vermonters in discussions. And we repeatedly heard throughout the process that these opportunities were really appreciated, and particularly the opportunities to engage with department staff. So thinking about how we continue to create those opportunities moving forward. And secondly, we wanted to be really intentional about setting goals for this process and holding ourselves accountable to doing things a little bit differently, but also giving us an opportunity to create a baseline from which we can move forward in terms of knowing who we were able to reach with the different opportunities we created and who we weren't. So we've been, as TJ mentioned, been really trying to be intentional about kind of getting a sense of who's attending our events. And we think that will be really valuable, both to be transparent about where our recommendations and any final report come from, and also to help us tailor engagement efforts moving forward. And then third, I think one of the things that we really thought went well was the partnerships that we created to develop these opportunities, whether that was talking with folks from Vermont Energy Education Program about the webinar series, or with the regional planning commissions on the series of events we held, and really co-developed a lot of the materials for that. Those partnerships certainly helped us think a little bit outside the box of how we would traditionally do things, and hopefully helped us reach a broader audience, whether that be in terms of geographically across the state or otherwise. And then I think in terms of some of the lessons learned, So it's a big learning experience for us about the resources that it takes to do this type of effort and how we want to prioritize those efforts to ensure we're reaching those in particular who are most impacted by our process. We had a couple different ideas for how we might reach the most impacted Vermonters, and there were just sort of a number of strategies that either fell through or weren't well timed. So thinking about how we learn from the data we've collected as we're trying to be accountable to doing things a little differently, that will be a reflection point for us, thinking about, again, how we refine these processes moving forward. And then last, it felt like there was really a need for better educational materials. And we worked, we think, pretty hard throughout the process to develop and iterate on educational content to help support these conversations in a more accessible way. But there's a clear learning there that there's some more work to be done there, and not only in terms of the materials we have to support education around energy related issues and how they present information and what they present, but also just creating additional opportunities to engage in these conversations to sort of elevate capacity for folks to engage in these conversations moving forward. So that is our sort of whirlwind tour of what we presented in the report last week. As TJ mentioned, we wanted to be somewhat brief here. I'm not wanting to do all the talking on the front end, but are happy to pull up specific portions of the report if folks have questions. But wanted to pause here for any clarifying questions on what TJ and I just touched on, and then we'll move into sort of the more discussion-based portion of today's agenda. So happy for folks to raise their hands or put comments or questions in the chat directed to Adam, and he can ask them for you if you'd prefer that.
I'm seeing no hands. I do have a couple questions here in the chat. If we want to start with that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I have a question from Vince O'Connell asking about quantification and documentation for the technical analysis, noting that the single page in the preliminary report didn't show a lot of information. I guess I would just point out, and I can throw this in the chat, that the entire model, as well as the stakeholder advisory group process that went into developing that model, is available on the PSD website. So I can provide links there and follow up offline, Vince. And then there's another follow-up question here from Vince that says, in a previous letter, it was mentioned that having a retail ratepayer representative on the advisory board, since they're the largest interest group affected by the res review, and there doesn't seem to be one, and offering any clarification on that. So just the representative of the advisory board. And I guess just, Vince, can you clarify, do you mean the stakeholder advisory group on the technical analysis, or that there's a separate legislative process that has its own advisory group?
I guess I was talking about the res review advisory group. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Vince. Thank you for that. Sure. So yeah, I'll just back up one step just because it was mentioned, and so I want to be clear that there were two groups going on over this in the fall here, and it was first there was a legislative working group. I think it was called the Legislative Renewable Energy Standard Reform Working Group. That was members of that group were designated by statute and have been discussing broad legislative proposals to change the renewable energy standard as directed by statute. That working group is also kind of wrapping up this month, and we'll have a report soon. The working group that I think you're referring to, Vince, is the stakeholder advisory group associated with the technical analysis. We did a nomination process for entities to represent kind of different groups, and notwithstanding the Department of Public Service technically being the ratepayer advocate in Public Utility Commission matters, we recognize that we take a Vermont as a whole look at ratepayer advocacy and balance a lot of different priorities in that. and we attempted to choose members of the stakeholder advisory group that represented a range of interests from, you know, municipal and non-municipal utility representatives to actually Vermonters who are real ratepayers, and that expressed an interest and had some experience in representing the public, whether they were select board members or had previous experience representing towns. And so I think that was the goal, and I'm happy to hear if there was a group that maybe should have been nominated or nominated itself that we missed or should have selected somebody else here.
Sure, and I have no doubt that people on the group are competent and generally representative. It's just I'm going by the categories that were defined by the request, and I mentioned that retail ratepayers weren't represented as a group. There are marginalized groups. There are utilities, you know, the PUC, but no retail ratepayer like ombudsman, for example. So that was my only question. And you know, I'm sure that the interests probably are considered anyway, since it's it's not going to be some heavily constrained or defined limitations on each individual's representation.
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope I appreciate that feedback, that if there is kind of a better representative that we should be kind of looking towards specifically engaging, then we should try and do that. So I think, Carl, you have your hand raised as well.
Hi. I just wanted to say, address myself to the key points that came out and look at the difference between the individual and local level as we approach the issue of renewable energy, and this versus the state issue, the statewide issues. You know, at the local issue area, it's pretty easy to get people who can afford it to upgrade their electric use of electricity through solar and appliances. And it's pretty easy to get a town that can afford it to make initiatives to increase their renewable, the use of renewables. At least that's been our experience in Reigate. Basically, people are prepared to move ahead on the renewable issues. However, when it comes to issues at a statewide level, where the executive and the legislature is involved, in other words, transmission in state that would support almost 100% of renewable energy coming from the state, the development of more solar by the state. It is difficult to do community solar. Those kinds of larger issues to make the state actually a repository of 100% renewable, that's not something at the individual and local level that takes place. That takes the executive, and I assume the public service department's part of our executive functions to lead the state into these macro issues that individuals and a town really don't know how to address. So I think to move in the area of renewable, 100% renewable standard, really needs leadership from the executive and the legislature, and I think the citizens will follow and accept it as long as the state and utilities provide the financial incentives to do it. That is getting to the issue of income diversity. So that's my comment about the keys, that you really need state leadership and state money and utility money to move ahead with the macro issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that. I hope we can discuss that in a little bit more, because I think that's a key point, and I think that's part of the balance of where does the money come from for the utility incentives and for the state incentives. Those are two different areas, and how do we best design the programs to bring people along and mitigate the money needed going forward. But I take your broader point too of state leadership is necessary. But thank you.
And I'll just say, I just want to hold space if there are any just clarifying questions about the process. And then that was actually a nice lead in into this more sort of structured and open discussion. So if anyone has clarifying questions, raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll move on and we can sort of build off of that comment. Vince?
Yeah, just based on what you said right now. So it looks like this preliminary report is primarily about the engagement process, about priorities, getting opinions from the public about what the priorities were. And the technical analysis really was a single page. So I'm not sure, is this meeting directed at the engagement process, making sure that voices are heard, or is this an appropriate venue for the technical analysis? And that's one question. And another one, I know affordability is mentioned, and it's really not. I mean, it really needs to be clarified what affordability means. I mean, is that direct cost of fuel, or is it the long-term costs of not making transition? Because these costs are, I mean, there are time scales to the various costs, and there are implications to things, and I couldn't see how that was necessarily addressed. Because affordability really is, it can be defined in different ways rather than just the immediate cost of fuel.
Yeah, thank you for that. So first, I just want to point out that I think there was one slide in the executive summary on the technical analysis, but the broader report had maybe 5 slides on it, and then also pointed to reports that was done by our technical consultant, Sustainable Energy Advantage, that had 50 or 60 slides that started to get into some of the questions, not all of them, that you're raising on affordability. So it talked about things like what are the costs, dollar per megawatt hour costs on rates over time, both cumulative, current renewable energy standard plus changes, or just incremental changes that we're talking about in the scenario analysis. I think Adam put in the chat some different links to some of the more detailed technical analysis that has been done, and maybe we could do a better job of linking those resources, because there has been quite a bit of reporting and analysis done where we kind of tried to open up to broad feedback. On your question on affordability, I think that's a really good point. Affordability means different things to different people, just like I mentioned, community solar means different things to different people. And we specifically, we didn't define it in a certain way. I think we could have had many meetings to try and define what affordability means. And I think taking it at a high level, at least the way I think about it, is just our overall cost of our electricity resources, and then taking that into context of needing to electrify and wanting to and kind of broadening a step to our energy resources. And that, we need to think about affordability in both the short term and the long term. Those are some initial thoughts. after having thought about this a lot, but also off the cuff here in this meeting on what I think of when I think of affordability. And I think others have answered questions and responded in surveys, et cetera, having their own meeting with their own idea of what affordability means. And so, but it, you know, to my mind, it is really the costs that are affecting Vermonters. And you know, you can define that also in a number of ways. So, so hopefully that was helpful response. Happy to engage further.
Great. Well, there are no clarifying questions. We wanted to leave the majority of this time to really have, as we've said a couple times already, more of an informal discussion on, I think, what we've tried to synthesize across all the buckets of work we've done, the technical analysis, of course, but then also the public engagement that we've done. And I'll mention, we do have detailed documentation for each of those individual efforts all on our website if there's any questions. So we sort of bucketed the discussion portion into 4 different kind of sections, which we can take as much or as little time on any one portion as there's interest, but really just to help us effectively synthesize what we're hearing and revise this draft before finalizing this process. So we thought it would be helpful to take feedback on the initial takeaways, and we can certainly go back so that those are up and fresh as folks want to comment. If there's any, and then walk through kind of any reflections on the process, if you've been able to engage so far or not, in any different realm, and then take feedback both on the report more broadly, and then thinking about like where we go from here as we move more into the recommendations, specific recommendations coming out of this effort and building off of these initial takeaways. So would invite folks again to raise your hand and turn your video on as you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. We can pull up more detailed sections of the report if that is helpful, if there are specific questions on any rationale behind some of these takeaways. And then we would have, of course, just remind folks to be respectful in terms of time, as we would love to hear from everyone who wants to make a comment. And also, if you're not comfortable speaking, continuing to send questions to Adam in the chat is a great alternative. So with that, we'll just open the floor, in particular, if there's any feedback on some of the 5 takeaways that TJ talked through, the questions, comments. Richard, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for holding this chat, this conversation. TJ mentioned a number of times community solar and kind of different impressions about what that means. And as a person who is actively involved in the Bristol Community Solar Project, I've reflected on it really a great deal. I would like community solar to be looked at maybe in several ways. One, I think it's really important that it be seen as a way to engage communities and increase buy-in. And that was certainly the case in Bristol. We had a good site, and we had virtual unanimous buy-in to the project. What was disappointing was that the financing, which involved essentially having series investors and so on, kind of took it out of the public hands. And while we got the project done, once people began to realize that the credits were going to be sold, it was a bit less attractive. And the second part is virtually no low-income people could participate. in it because of that financing. It was far too expensive, and there wasn't low cost financing available. And so I would like to see more emphasis, I think, in the future on building real community solar in which towns gain a direct benefit from the process. We've gained a little bit through rental of the space, the acreage. And secondly, I think we really have to get serious about community wind. And I know there are reactions about that, but when you think about the acreage required to produce given electricity, given amount, between solar and wind, there's a real striking difference. So I think we have to work on public acceptance for wind. I consider a wind generator beautiful because of what it actually means. And so I think those are several things that I missed seeing in the report to that degree anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and good to see you again. Can I ask you, in terms of benefits for the community, what, specifically what types of benefits are you looking to accrue? Is it, you mentioned kind of essentially the tax benefits of, the solar being located in the town, but beyond that, can you describe a little more what you mean by that?
I guess I go back to a conference I attended a long time ago at Boston University, in which I think it was a building energy conference, in which there was a great deal of excitement in Massachusetts about community wind projects, in which the actual it was essentially a utility owned by the town, and so profits were generated, electric rates were lowered because of the presence of those utilities in the town, and so people were very excited about it. It was kind of also like when I lived in Maine, and Maine Yankee was proposed, and they were talking about, well, Wiscasset would get free energy forever. If you can, that didn't work out so well, but if you can have that kind of business arrangement so the towns really have ownership, I think there'd be more acceptance.
So in that, I want to dive into this a little bit because I think it's a really important question, and I don't know that we have all the answers either here, but I want to draw a distinction between kind of how the broader regulation in Vermont versus other states, and how kind of we fit into that. So Vermont remains, vertically integrated. So you don't have a choice for your retail electricity provider, right? If you live in Green Mountain Power's territory, that's who provides you electricity. And that utility also, either owns or provides for both the transmission and distribution as well. And so having that vertical integration comes with trade-offs, just like everything, right? That they're able to enter into very long-term contracts, which can soften kind of mitigation in wholesale markets. And on the other hand, it doesn't provide a end-use customer with retail choice in their provider to go with one avenue or another. And so, like in the example in Massachusetts, I'm not sure if it was a municipal utility, which we have many of in the state, or if it was a independent, private, or nonprofit, even retail electricity provider that was kind of basing their supply on solar. or other community renewable energy, community wind you mentioned. And so there's a little bit of a difference there in that, the utility need in Vermont needs to provide for that electricity and keep it on and keep rates low. And other states, some of these retail providers can, they actually only allowed to contract for energy for 6 months or 1 year. And so it leaves those customers really subject to kind of volatility in the market. And just wanted to, flag some of those differences, because it is like that broader kind of regulatory construct. I don't think it's relevant, but it's not, it seems a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, and kind of what should be the requirements for broad electricity procurement, and kind of aren't at least right now the subject of those policy discussions. Maybe it should be, but right now they're not. And so with that context, I want to just kind of dive in a little more to the thought of the community being able to kind of make a profit on a renewable energy resource. And I think that can be the case depending on the financing, the size of the project, kind of the cost of the land, and all of these different inputs into what a cost of a project are. What we're seeing right now with community solar in Vermont is a lot of it is happening through net metering and group net metering. And the way that is compensated allows the town to make a profit, but it's because the rates that are being provided are healthy. They're greater than what utilities could otherwise purchase energy or even renewable energy for. And so there's this shift of, okay, all utility ratepayers are paying for one community's solar, and that community who has the wherewithal to actually develop the solar can actually really benefit from the current setup. But what I'm hopeful we can find a way to do is to encourage communities to propose and move forward with community renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind or whatever the community desires, but also to do it in a way that doesn't impact other ratepayers, and so that either negatively or positively, so that the community could reap all the benefits if it's a positive input, or the other ratepayers aren't kind of funding for that community that has the wherewithal to do it. And exactly how we do that, I think there may be ways, but we need to figure out how to best move that forward. And once we help with the cost, or once we figure out that kind of conundrum, it will allow us to really encourage a lot more community solar in that way, or community renewable energy, community wind, community geothermal even. And so, sorry, I didn't mean to talk so much on that, but I wanted to kind of give a really broad and comprehensive sharing of at least my thinking on that. So hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, TJ. That was, and I agree with you in this and the last part of your comments.
Great, thanks. I'm not sure who was first. So I'm going to go just in the order that I see them on my screen. See you all on my screen. So Carl.
I just want to pick up a couple of things. What Richard said. I was involved with the Peacham Solar, which is successful community solar project, went online this fall, and we're trying to start one in Reigate. And Peacham ran into the same problem. They couldn't get there's no lower income people on their community solar project. And that's the same problem that we'll have in Reigate, getting lower income or modest income people community solar. And so this is where the state financing comes in. that the state would have to require the utilities and or the state in combination to supplement these lower income people to get involved with the renewable energy future. And on the issue of transmission, I'll just throw this in here. I participated in the meetings of the 10-year transmission plan, and it was based on one half, if I remember correctly, one half of our energy coming from out of state, and that's what our transmission lines are for. Our transmission lines are not set up through Velcro to support 100% of renewable energy within the state, which would include a lot of community solar. And so those are two issues which I think amongst many which keep us from moving solar into individual households and keeps us from moving Vermont renewable energy into the state by continuing to have a system which relies on so much out-of-state energy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And definitely hearing the message that figuring out the community renewable energy path is really important. And well, I think we should move on, but if there's time, I could talk a little bit about what the state is doing with some of the support for low income and solar or trying to do. But really want to save the time to hear from you all. So, Annette, I think you're next.
Good morning. So I will offer a few comments. Regarding community solar, I remember being in a State House forum, I think it might have been 2010, where people were testifying in a public hearing saying we need a template for community solar. And I think that it's something that is very much in the legislature's purview, but it's something that we really, as a state, haven't done anything with. I am seeing, and I don't know the details, but New Hampshire seems to be doing, they have some sort of a program where towns and communities can develop, and I don't know if they own the projects, but it might be worth taking a look at what's happening in New Hampshire. I don't think this is something the department can do on its own, but I think that, I mean, one of the comments that I've made to the Renewable Energy Standard Legislative Committee is I don't think we're having the right conversation. And that goes to this long held desire. And I think, I've been really disappointed by how Vermont has developed renewable energy. I've lived off grid for more than 30 years. I never expected that we would be having this top down, large scale developments that just get plunked down where the developers want them. And we have a perfect opportunity for starting more organically on the community level and serving local load and putting the projects where they support the grid and where it's needed and reducing transmission costs. And everything has just been completely upside down and backwards in how we've done it. To the idea of community ownership and also specific to wind, I have a couple of comments. I think, Richard, you might want to take a look at what's happened in Massachusetts with some of those projects. Falmouth is sort of the postcard of failure, where they invested a lot of money and they're now having to eat that. It was, I think, at their wastewater treatment plant, over tremendous damage to the community from the noise, abandoned homes, a lot of litigation. Judges finally said, take them down. And the town is not getting any breaks on it. And so there are other communities in Massachusetts that have similar stories of the communities being encouraged to invest in wind turbines, of then the reality of the noise issues being impossible for people to live around. Look at Scituate, look at Fairhaven, look at Falmouth. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from there. In Vermont, most recently, David Blittersdorf proposed a community benefits project in Castleton on Grandpa's Knob. And the numbers were not clear, but he was offering to share the profits with the neighboring 4 towns. And one of the things that came out of that was that the towns would also have to share in the costs. And if there were mechanical problems, if there was new equipment needed, it started to not look like such a good deal. That project didn't happen, but we're now hearing a new cry for wind energy. And I just want to issue a real caution to people who don't know anything about what's happened in Vermont with industrial wind turbines. We have for me, it's an extremely painful and very sad topic with a lot of damage done, with community divisiveness, with incredible environmental damage that has shocked people, abandoned homes. It's not just the noise issues, but the noise issues are part of the divisiveness, because some people are bothered and some people aren't. So it comes down to, well, I'm okay, I don't care if you're not okay. And for the people who were not okay and are not okay, there is no acceptance of responsibility. And so as long as nobody will admit that there are problems, there is no way for anyone's issues to get addressed. And I've been looking at what's happened around the mountains, and whenever I have become aware of someone who has had problems and follow up, well, they moved. And so it's like history never happened. And I assure you, there is a long and not very good history, but you want to go put an industrial wind turbine in your community, see what happens when that's proposed. It's either going to divide the community and create lifelong problems, or it's going to happen in a way that you might not expect, with widespread opposition, because people are now aware of the environmental and societal damage that has happened, not just in Vermont, but it's the same story in many places. In terms of it being a useful technology, the wind historically in Vermont, as we have observed from neighbors living around the projects, blows mostly at night. And that's when the noise problems are the worst, because the ambient noise levels around the places where these have been built are in the low 20s or even lower than 20 decibels. And an increase of more than 10 decibels above background is guaranteed by, and this is a long held knowledge of noise experts, guaranteed to cause complaints. And so people say, well, 45 decibels is the sound of a library, and how dare we have a noise standard that's lower? But if your background noise level at night is 20 and you're being exposed to 40, that's 20 decibels above background, and it's logarithmic, and that's when you get the complaints. So I have done a tremendous amount of research. I've been to other states. I've met with neighbors in the coal region. I've said, why are you opposing these? It's because of the noise problems and the health issues that arise when people are sleep deprived and they just don't want to live in their homes anymore. And what do we don't have, I've told people you got to move. I've helped people move. I've personally put money into people moving. There's no place to move anymore. That's not a solution. If we are going to do it, then we're going to have to acknowledge there are noise problems. We're going to have to come up with a way of addressing the noise problems. And the wind industry will not admit there are noise problems. And that's where the conversation has stalled. So thank you for hearing me on this. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Annette. Yeah, and I want to go back to one of the first things you said, that we talked about community solar or community projects way back in 2010 or 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, right? And I think that is group net metering has evolved as the answer to community, right? And I think we're in a spot now is how can we do that better is the question we need to answer. And I think, you know, maybe in some sense, that's a natural progression of policy, which is often a blunt tool. I think in the, you know, 2016, we saw the guidance for enhanced energy planning for communities to take more sway. I think that was a direct reaction to a lot of plans or a lot of projects being cited with, we'll say, less than optimal community engagement. And so, and you know how that process has borne out, I think it actually still remains to be seen, but maybe there's a way for that to better evolve with this discussion as well.
Right. Well, you know, there is currently an industrial wind project that got a standard offer contract proposed for Stanford, and it turns out the developer was working on it for 2 years. They got the contract last year. The community only found out about it this year, and they have an enhanced energy plan that says that they actually have preferred sites on their best wind resources for industrial wind turbines, but the developer didn't choose that, and they chose something that's very close to a development in a lot of people's homes. And their town plan, their enhanced energy plan, has a specific policy that says that wind turbines must be set back at least 1 kilometer from year-round residences. And this wind turbine has something like 9 of them within that distance, and they're proceeding anyway. And so it's obviously not enough what's happened with the enhanced energy planning if developers say, well, it's not a guarantee that the PUC is going to deny it. And what I'd like to see us do is work with the utilities, the communities working with the utilities, and first coming up with the places where we need it and want it, and develop from a community level and bring the developers in afterwards. I'm also concerned when we talk about equity with the grid, where, for instance, I'm in Rutland County, and if you look at GMP's 2.0 solar map and look over on the western side of the state, there's all this area in red, and there just isn't the grid. We don't have hardly any 3-phase power, and so there's a much larger issue with how the electrification can happen equitably when and where the money is going to come from for those distributed energy resources, and if they're going to fuel the electrification of heat pumps and electric vehicles, how that need is going to be paid for when and those upgrades done. Because right now, I don't see how certain parts of the state are going to be able to benefit from and even move to electrification.
So yeah, thank you for that. The enhanced energy planning is what I was talking about. We can't comment here really on what is, as you mentioned, that kind of an active case, but I do think that it'll be one of the first ones where there's actually a test of the whole process. And so it kind of well, that's all I'll say about that case, because it is an open docket. And yeah, in terms of the map, I believe that's kind of a balance in the GMP solar. That's a map, if I'm thinking of the correct one, of the remaining headroom or a lack thereof for more generation. And so that actually is potentially a prime location for electrification. And so how we match up the both the incentives to encourage electrification in the right spots, but also the incentives to encourage generation in the right spots, I think is going to be critical going forward. And we have issued new guidance last year for utilities and their integrated resource planning to better take a better look at these issues in more detail, really doing load flow studies and to the extent they can, and taking the next step in their planning so that we can better match the load and demand and utilize what we have in the system well. And where needed, there's certain areas of the state that are going to need upgrades, no matter how well we manage it, and to prioritize those and manage them cost effectively is important, but who pays is another critical question. So, thank you for all of that.
The only one who's going to pay, it's going to have to be state funding and pay as you go at utilities, and the legislature is going to have to require that of the utilities, but it's going to take federal and state money.
So, yeah, who pays there's a lot of different. I'll just kind of go on with that comment because you mentioned it before, Carl, and I think I agree with you that it needs some money from somewhere. If it's federal money, state money, depending on what you mean by that, that's general fund, or if it's utility money, then that's other ratepayers or all ratepayers. And so that's part of the trade-off I talked about. And one of the key takeaways, right, is that Vermonters are estimated to pay, from our technical analysis, to pay more, and then there are societal benefits, and that's the trade-offs, and how much more. And in terms of federal money, this is what I said I was gonna hold off on. I think since both you and Richard commented on it, the state has directed some federal money towards helping low-income customers access renewable energy. We have what's called the Affordable Community Renewable Energy Program using ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act, so COVID relief dollars, really, to support renewable energy installations in different utilities. We have grant is $10 million that has come to the Department of Public Service that we're passing through to utilities after a competitive solicitation process. And there's a number of different programs that we're essentially piloting through this $10 million. It's, Vermont Electric Co-op is enhancing their community solar program, as they define it, and delivering rate credits as part of that to low-income customers. As part of this federal money, Washington Electric Co-op is kind of joining into that, partnering with Vermont Electric Co-op. So the co-ops are getting a certain portion of money. Stowe Electric, for example, is trying to redevelop a small hydro facility right right where the electric utility is located. And Green Mountain Power is getting some funding, and utilities are and VIPSA municipal utilities are getting some funding to develop projects and then deliver those benefits to low-income customers. Now, those are through utilities. It's one mechanism to do this. I'll also note that the state also, the Department of Public Service also put in a response to a federal solicitation under the Solar for All program, which is a part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, where we have it's a competitive solicitation across states, where we've asked for $100 million to support solar access for more Vermonters. And we've taken a number of different tacks within that $100 million, so that, because one solution, there's not one silver bullet that fits all. So we've applied for money, not exactly, but roughly a third each, for supporting small scale, like 5 kW or less, on on rooftops with for low and moderate income customers. We have partnered with VHFA, Vermont Housing Finance Administration, to support community projects with for affordable housing. And then the other third is to support the ACRE program that I just talked about, where and kind of further push the ball, or further expand and test kind of how best to deliver benefits to low and moderate income customers. So we're trying to get more of that federal money to provide, but to the extent we don't get federal money, it comes from ratepayers, or it comes from the general fund. And we could have arguments all day about tax policy, where the best place for it to come from is, but that's probably beyond the scope of today. But I did just want to share what we're doing.
TJ, that's the battle, and I am a WEC, Washington Electric Co-op, and they feel financially hamstrung. No, that's the right word. The ability to move into renewable electric, they just don't have the money. Trying to keep above water where they're at, and how are they going to move forward in some of the kind of programs you're talking about when they feel financially hamstrung? And that's the battle, was we're taxing properly at the federal level and getting that money down into the utilities. If we're going to have the utilities do these programs, they're going to have to be supported, especially the small ones. Maybe GMP is doing better with their new program plan, but WEC says they're struggling.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Vince, your hand's been up for a really long time. Thank you for your patience, or I'm not sure if that's the old hand, but if it isn't, then I want to turn it back to you with your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, there's so many different things that have been raised here. Maybe if I'll try and be brief. As far as developing hydropower goes, I mean, one of the major obstacles is harmonizing the ANR's requirements for dam development. And for example, Hardwick Electric has a prime site at Mackey Dam. It's got 130 feet ahead, but the process getting through the approvals, even though it's FERC regulated, getting through the approvals with the ANR, it's as if they have two different motivations and they're not harmonized, and those regulations need to be streamlined. Just on a general note, the solar for all, I mean, renewable energy is great, but without having, I mean, you have a lot of intermittent resources. Without having a reliable base load, it's not functional. I mean, you can extend renewable energy purchases to MISO. That'll maybe that spreads out and creates a more reliable, larger system for renewable energy with contracts, for example. But one thing that continues to not really be mentioned, even though it is in the general summary, and I apologize that I didn't read the other documents in the supporting documents. But I mean, storage is essential. Whatever type of storage it is, whether it's pump storage or batteries. I mean, a lot of these issues, for example, distribution utility upgrades can be dealt with virtual power plants by having local storage. And NREL and DOE have, I mean, the surrounding states, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, with the notable exception of New Hampshire, they have as part of their policy, they're requiring the construction of I think it's 3.5 gigawatts of storage over the next several years for this specific reason, to avoid distribution utility upgrades, to be able to get black start for outages, peak shaving. I mean, any number of things. It just evens out. It buffers, and makes much more flexible the ability to dispatch power when it's needed, and then to store it when there's an excess, for example. But the storage, I mean, it really, especially, just by defining it virtual power plant, it is an energy source, and it should be part of the renewable energy standard, rather than, GMP is doing a great job implementing a lot of their storage, and VEC is they're making a good effort. I think it takes a long time to educate the public and make it seem viable. But in any case, those are ad hoc, non-mandated programs that are submitted by the utilities. The PUC doesn't require it, the statute doesn't require it. And take the example of the surrounding states. Not that that means that it's a perfect solution, but it really, you can have all the solar you want, you're not going to have any power at night. Unless you have some kind of base load like nuclear, which is an incredibly reliable and rapidly dispatchable, once it's constructed, extremely low cost and low maintenance and low impact, reliable source of electricity, especially with a lot of the new DOE research that's going on with reactor type heat pipes, heat transfer, stuff like that. But in any case, going back to what I was saying, have to have base load, have to have storage. Storage should be included in the res, or in some form or another. I mean, that's my personal opinion. It really, to talk about community solar is wonderful, but again, all these things, solar is solar. Solar is during the day. Wind is sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. Hydro is all the time, unless it doesn't rain, unless there's a drought. As you said, there's no perfect solution. These are all components, but having that buffering, essentially having a reservoir of energy that can be dispatched in an intelligent manner, and not just storage. I'm not sure it's appropriate within the res, but having demand response programs that can be included they are considered under 222 for 2222 as energy generators, and having that kind of dynamic demand response to moderate a lot of the issues that come up, like with grid congestion, for example. I mean, it feels like this is an opportunity to incorporate these things into the renewable energy standard, because they're not, renewable energy isn't separate from these things. It is a component of the same system. And it feels like it needs to be regarded that way. And that doesn't mean to, you guys have done a lot of good work, and I don't mean to be critical at all. I'm just thinking that these things need to be addressed.
Yeah,
sorry
no,
if that's.
No, thank you. I didn't take it that way, but it's okay to be critical, even if you were. But yeah. So we, on the technical analysis specifically, designed it to not include load flexibility, which would include storage, because we wanted to get a sense of actually how much might be needed, and like have a better indication of what might be needed there, and have this study perhaps be an input to further conversation. And I just, two things I'll point out, I think, is one, the other states have storage targets, I think, in part because they have requirements, in part because of the structure of their utilities, like I was talking about before, where they have to buy on the in shorter term increments, and they might not see the kind of use case or business case for storage that our utilities do. And I think, and this is subject to check, but that, you know, we have over 50 megawatts installed storage in the state right now. You know, somewhere between 2 and 4 hours of use time for that 50 megawatts. And then another few dozen, I believe, megawatts of storage that are in the permitting process right now. And so, you know, we're up to, if those ultimately get permitted, we're up to 10% of our peak, over 10% of our peak, being you know, potentially met by storage. So we, you know, that raises the question of whether a target in Vermont is needed, given kind of the structural overlay of our utilities and how much, you know, how what's happening anyway. Now, that might not be happening exactly equal across utilities, and I think that's an important question and equity question. The other thing I just mentioned on storage is in that difference is, you know, there's a lot of surplus in the spring and summer of generation and a lot of deficit in the winter with some of the scenarios that we model. And storage isn't necessarily going to solve that particular problem, right? It's because we can't store it, you know, from July and use it in January. It's a little more dynamic than that. And so I think all the load flexibility options are really important that you're talking about, and how we best encourage them is kind of a to be determined. It's been a little bit outside the scope of our analysis, but is still a critical question as we go forward. And because the business case is important, there's not only all the benefits you talked about, but there's the cost associated with implementing it. And so we wanted to, the way we structured the analysis was to see how much we might need, and then another evaluation could be done on, well, what's the cost benefit of the storage and kind of coming in. And that could be, you know, a little bit of a chicken and egg in an analysis, and I can understand that, but I just wanted to share how things were structured in terms of answering those questions.
Sure, thanks. And if I could just have just a little follow-up to that. I mean, assuming that there's one reason to have storage, I think, I'm sure you guys address this too, but I think would be a faulty analysis. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons. One big one being that people want to have a backup when the power goes out, for example. And not having a GMP has incentives and VEC does, and but the VEPSA has specifically stated that they're against providing that kind of structure. And, you know, the municipal utilities, they basically follow VEPSA's guidance just because of the capacity issue. And I think that's ill-advised, but so there are many reasons to have the storage. Where was I going with that?
Yeah.
That was the main reason. I think, and I know what the other one was. As far as equitable access to renewable energy goes, I mean, I think having storage be part of that could be a great thing. You don't necessarily need solar panels. You know, if you can have those distributed resources provide peak shaving services to a utility, it ends up saving them a lot more. I mean, they can end up, you know, it ends up being could end up being a huge cost savings, and then have that money go into installing batteries that are then available for dispatch at income qualified houses. And then they end up being able to participate because they have backup power. So it's not just solar. I mean, it can be storage as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That's my other point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Richard, quickly, and then I want to go to Ronald Krauth. Sorry, I probably pronounced your last name wrong. And then I do want to see if there's also reflections on the process or the and where do we go from here. Richard, next.
This is becoming incredibly interesting. I wish we could go on for the rest of the day. I just wanted to point out that here in Bristol, I can look out my window now that the leaves are off the trees and see the construction of a 2.2 megawatt solar field with battery backup that I think is really great.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Ronald.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. And this has been an incredibly interesting discussion, and I read a lot in this. But what I find lacking in everything I read is the actual science of this. You're talking about finance and all that. I'm talking about the physics of it. For instance, I have solar panels, and on the Green Mountain Powerwall thing, which has been fantastic. The last couple of days has saved me, so I'm certainly not against that. But for instance, today, so far I've generated 0.3 kilowatt hours on my system. I want to know, what are you going to do? How are you going to generate not only storage, but how are you going to generate enough power? And I don't see any science behind this. I'm not talking about the technical finance. I'm talking about where is the energy coming from? My reading right now for today is 0.3 kilowatt hours. And we all know Vermont, being a very sunny state, sarcasm, has this problem a lot. So as the previous person mentioned about backup, about reliable power, nuclear power, I like to see, besides all the chatter, I like to see the actual numbers, not just, I mean physics numbers, energy numbers, when this stuff is done. And I much appreciate detailed physics, energy analysis, not words, but actual numbers to put this in some sort of perspective.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. Thank you for that. I think that's an important point. And I'm not, a couple things. I think it's important to remember that we're part of a regional grid that's interconnected with other regions, including Quebec, New York, and we, because of that, we don't always, it doesn't all have to come from within our borders. And I think there's benefit to remembering that we are act as a region in a lot of ways, and the states are working together in a lot of ways to figure out how to, whether it's build more offshore wind or just have more transmission to better manage the flow of power from state to state. There was a lot of times when we had Vermont Yankee that Vermont was an exporter of energy.
Go back to that.
And we are, for the first time recently, we've started to, in certain hours, export energy to the rest of New England. It's only a few hours a year right now. We would expect that to grow with more penetration of solar. As load grows, there needs to be new resources or new ties coming into the region. We haven't seen load grow, but we're certainly expecting it to with electrification. And so I think where it comes from is a really important question, and whether we want to constrain there's trade-offs. If we constrain ourselves to it coming from just Vermont, there's going to be trade-offs with size of resource, cost of the resource, land use impacts of resources, and we need to evaluate those trade-offs as we go forward. And the last thing, I think that a lot of the scenarios we've evaluated call for and require the development of new renewable resources, and so that would help to meet some of that new demand. But you know, that's you asked for it in technical analysis as and not words. Our model is on our website, and we could share that specifically with you. And then we also publish an annual resource report, which has we have we usually share it in kind of pie chart form of where does our power come from, and so that's like the current state of affairs of where our power has come from over the last several years, and we can certainly get that to you as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, hi.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for doing these very public discussion forums. I mean, I had a couple of comments. One of them was around education, actually, and it was a sort of reflection on the process. I know you had something around, more education is needed. I'm a recent transplant to Vermont, and certainly I've had a crash course in energy and electricity over the last year, and this has been part of it. And I think that the more people would understand about where their energy sources are coming from and the harms that some of the alternative energy sources that we're currently using are creating, I think there would be more urgency and understanding of the need to change and to move things forward. So I do think that there is a public need, sort of responsibility on the part of the Public Services Department to educate the public more, the Vermonters more about what their energy source is doing and how it's impacting, and relate it to the floods that have been happening this year and some of the climate change dynamics that they're seeing. I think that creates more of an urgency for change. So that's one point I had. And then the second point was on renewable energy credits. I joined your workshop some time ago now on RECs to try and understand more about why Vermont was allowing utilities to trade and unbundle their renewable energy credits from the source of energy, so that they were no longer investing in new renewable energy, but were just trading off and offsetting their renewable requirements through these credits. And I get it that you needed to start a market for this, but I do believe we're at the point now that something has to change around how utilities are getting away with not investing in Vermont renewable energy generation. So those would be my two comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I completely agree with you on the education point, and we're still working on ways to continue to do that. On the RECs, it's there's also discussions. I will say again, we don't act alone in kind of the development of REC markets and how states and utilities across the region and even the country, but focused on ISO New England and the region, account for and track the meeting of different requirements. And RECs are a tool, and they're a confusing tool, for the general public for sure. But that's all they are, really, is a tool. So I think there's mechanisms to, whether it's RECs or another way to on the policy front, to ensure that we're meeting our policy objectives. If for instance, the result is an increased requirement for new renewable energy, then that right now that the mechanism to measure progress is through renewable energy credits. And one problem I have with those is that they're on an annual basis, and so it kind of ignores the more granular need to match supply and demand, like we mentioned from one of the takeaways. And so taking steps along that continuum to kind of better match supply and demand, whether it's with RECs or another policy mechanism, I think is your point, so that it's not so the changes that we're putting forward are real and they're not just show. I don't think anybody wants anything just for show, because these policies are costly, and if we're just doing it for show, then what are we really doing here? So thank you for that, and it's a good reminder that we have more work to do on RECs.
Yeah, could I just sort of follow that up? Because my understanding is that that's how the utility companies have been able to make profitable investments in the limited renewable energy generation that they're putting forward, is through trading these RECs. And I feel like there has to be more regulation, or part of the new renewable energy standard, revised renewable energy standard, has to manage this process better. So it's not just left to the open market, it's through some kind of managed transition, so that I know that they have to retire a certain percentage, but there seems like the unbundling is allowing a certain amount of what I would call greenwashing in terms of our renewable energy goals that we're meeting.
Yeah, thanks. And just so beyond a utilities requirement, is they're actually encouraged by policy right now to sell those RECs to other entities that might need them to make other obligations, and that's because utilities are required to do least cost planning. No utilities are making profits off of those, like going into some fat cat's back pocket. All of those sales of those credits go to kind of reduce the revenue that would otherwise need to be collected from ratepayers. And so it's really, there wouldn't be a need to sell the RECs if the requirements were really high, is one way you could put it. And then really the RECs are just a tracking tool, and the value associated with them are the value that's theoretically necessary to encourage renewable development. Like, as they were originally designed, it was to find the missing money for what market prices for power were and what the costs of renewable energy development were, and the difference, it was theoretically to be the REC price. And so that would actually encourage development, and I think it has encouraged development. And it's really a matter of the different requirements and designing those requirements and policy mechanisms correctly to meet our policy goals. Sorry, I kind of ended that with some policy speak. That I feel like maybe I didn't say anything by saying a lot of words there. I didn't intend for that to happen, but it's a complicated issue here. Annette, I want to recognize we also have about 20 minutes left here of discussion, so we do want to get to reflections on the process and in the other two topics here.
I'd like to comment a little bit about what you were just talking about, but
Yeah,
I raised my hand regarding reflections on the process. So I'll do that first. So I don't know anybody who was involved in the focus groups or the polls. I don't know how you identified those people, but given that I know quite a few people, I was kind of surprised that nobody let me know that they were contacted. So the main comment I have had to do, and it is an education piece, it is, and it's something that we learned previously. When you just ask someone, do you want to see more wind energy in Vermont? It's an easy question to answer yes to. I know that I have in the past. And what we learned was that it's important to ask a preparatory question. Do you have any experience with industrial wind turbines located in Vermont? And if you ask that, if the people have no prior experience, it then gives you a little more understanding of the response. But if people don't have any experience at all, or if they do have experience, it would just give you some information that is missing. It is so easy to support wind energy in theory. It all makes so much sense, and gee, why not? The wind is free. But it is important how those questions are phrased. I use that as an example. I haven't looked at any of the other questions through that lens to evaluate whether an education piece is needed. But in that case, we've learned that it is needed. And so that's my process comment. I haven't studied the report, but in terms of what I'd like to see included, and a lot of people have said this to me in recent times, why aren't we ever talking about using less? It's always about more. And as we are now exporting power sometimes on sunny days, I think that's an important piece of the discussion, is we always need to be including the opportunities for conservation and efficiency. On the REC issue and the RES update in general, what's become pretty clear to me, having participated in the Department of Public Services stakeholder group and watching all the discussions at the legislative committee, is that we're essentially seeing a conflict between the cost of it all. And so, for instance, on the REC issue, what I asked, I mean, I don't think that the legislative committee has a lot of data on which to base their decisions on moving forward. I had suggested we see a business as usual with the current REC sales, and then a business as usual, or then a model that just showed what would happen if we didn't do if we didn't allow any REC sales at all. Because it's clear that and the utilities have all said this in the meetings, that selling the RECs is a very important factor in keeping costs down. And this collision between the desire for more renewable energy and then having more in-state renewables and but still enabling selling RECs, but if you don't allow the sale of RECs, or if you minimize the sale of RECs or discontinue them, what is that going to do to the electric bills? And it comes down to, rates and how much people can afford, where people are already pretty squeezed. So I'm beginning to have a better understanding. I mean, these have been very interesting meetings and discussions, and I'm having a better understanding of the dynamics in play. I will push back a little. The utilities are making some investments in renewables. I mean, I'm seeing that there are some roughly 5 megawatt projects that are being promoted by a developer who then is GMP is entering into contracts to buy that power. So I don't think it's all just REC arbitrage that is meeting the RES requirements. But I'm increasingly concerned about the RES and where the legislators are heading without the basic data. I mean, I was thinking yesterday how I would really like to see the data right now on how the RES is being met specifically with, for instance, tier 2, and how much of it is the net metering homeowner RECs, and how much of it is new in-state renewables that the utilities are doing. I don't think that the whole conversation has had enough background data to support going into the sort of the broad brush of increasing 10 or 20 or 30% and by certain dates. So thank you. That was kind of rambling, and I'm sorry, but those are my free thoughts there.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'm glad you started with the using less and efficiency. I think that is these days we sometimes take it for granted. This process was really about procurement and the supply side of things, but we do sometimes take efficiency for granted with the programs we've had for a long time that have actually, lowered our load by 15%, from what it otherwise would have been, and we need to continue with that. I'll just also mention for everybody's benefit that the polling was really a random number digit dial to have text messages or phone calls, and people could either respond via the web for a survey or talk to somebody on the phone, and then the focus groups were taken from those participants that were selected from random sample that completed the initial survey. They were asked if they were interested in participating in a focus group, and there was an attempt to ensure that the demographics of the polling matched with the demographics of the state. We also did oversample based on race, and so we have a lot of that information in the polling report. Okay, Pat, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Having a little trouble with the camera. Hang on just a sec. I'm sorry, I have a disability that makes it very hard to use the mouse on this to turn the camera on. So I'm just going to let it go, if that's all right. And
yes, that's totally fine.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that department has been doing. It's a heavy lift, and I want to address some things that I still haven't seen included, and maybe I've just missed it. I have not read every page. And it ties a little bit to Annette's sort of final comment about, timing for the envelope for the discussion that you've all been having. And that's around our access as a state or even as a region to the technologies that are being discussed. And I will not call them renewable. I will call them NEGs, non-emitting generation, just like nuclear power is. These technologies are dependent on finite resources, and there is already tremendous competition, rising prices because of the competition for the raw materials to make turbines, solar panels, and battery banks. And so I'm wondering if there is some way to include one in the education part that these are not really renewable. We use that term, but an asterisk or something that they are dependent on materials that are in varying degrees of supply. And I guess I'm just not believing that Vermont has the global clout to ensure that it's going to get what it claims to get. And so I'm just hoping that kind of transparency about the supply chain is or could be included at some point, because there's certainly tremendous amount of news in the mining trade and other places about this problem. The American National Academy of Sciences that runs the numbers for Congress and the president, they're sounding the alarm, as are other organizations. And it seems short-sighted that we would not be taking that into account. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Pat, for that comment. I think that we specifically have, well, unless folks on the team here can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe we've taken that into account. Part of those discussions happened in a life cycle analysis, but that's really emissions analysis. So the emissions from going from source to sink, or from cradle to grave, I guess. That's even not included in our analysis right now. So just want to be really clear what it is and isn't. There's a lot of work going on to consider life cycle analysis elsewhere. That's not exactly what I understand. That's not exactly what you are commenting on, because it even goes further onto like the materials impact and the use of finite resources. And I think all technologies, whether they're the current ones or new ones, do use finite resources, and it's another one of the trade-offs that it's one to consider, as you raised. So thank you for that. I guess there's the focus on the slide here, but I guess you want to just open up to any other comments across any topics, and then we do have another slide that will tee up ways to comment on issues we don't get to. But there are other any last comments folks want to share? Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I had a question about how the output, the report, is going to be used by the legislative RES working group. I mean, are you formally presenting to them? How does that, how does the impact of what we've been discussing go forward?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to use it. Hopefully they use it. I have the department has presented a couple of times on the results of the technical analysis. We've not been given time in that legislative group to really go into detail on the polling or the regional planning work that we've done, or the broader public engagement, although we've kind of highlighted it as we've talked about some of the technical analysis results really briefly, snuck it in there. And so we have shared the technical analysis, and and provided those materials. And I'm not exactly sure what that working group is going to do with it, except having taken the presentations in and having that piece of information to inform their considerations. As far as we're concerned, we want to take all of this work and the comments we're receiving here and over the next couple of weeks till the deadline here, in development of what the administration's proposal will be around the renewable energy standard. And so that will then kind of come forth and be informed by more discussions, and that it will be within the legislative process at that point. And so we hope to kind of continue to engage the public through that process. I'll admit it gets harder when things are moving quickly in that process, and to keep people up to date, it's not a reason not to do it or an excuse, just a reality. But I think those are the next steps with regard to kind of the administration's process, and then the legislative group. Hopefully, they feel informed and by the work that we've done and the engagement we've done with Vermonters. Carl, and then Vince.
Yeah, recommendations number 4 on the list. I would recommend that the Department of Public Service recommend to the legislature and the executive branch that there be a pay-as-you-go option for community solar. That low and moderate income people can't purchase the kilowatt hours they want to purchase, that there be a pay-as-you-go option built into the system. That would be my recommendation.
Great, thank you, Carl. Vince?
I guess just to follow up to Elizabeth's point, I mean, without being cynical, I mean, the legislative working group really has no obligation to incorporate or let the advisory group's information inform their decision making at all. I mean, it really is advisory only, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, I mean, you know, like I said, not to be cynical, but I mean, it does provide some engagement cover. And yeah, I just wanted to know the actual structure. So, okay.
Well, so I just wanted to be clear that you know, as far as the department and how we're developing policy, the engagement has really been meaningful. I'm not, what I was agreeing with is that the legislature doesn't necessarily have to do anything with the work that we've done, or they can. Hopefully they do.
Okay, great. Yeah, you just answered my follow-up question. What, in your realistic opinion, the impact of that advisory group would be for the legislative group?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one for me to answer. I think there's definitely certain members of the advisory group that will rely on the technical analysis more heavily than others, and that's just the nature of politics, really, and you know, opinions, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. So yeah, yes, we'll wrap up here in the last 2 minutes. So just a reminder, the you know, key takeaways document, or you know, the report is open for public comment until December 20th. And you can also weigh in other ways as well on really any topic. Doesn't just have to be the report. It can be specific item, like the pay-as-you-go recommendation, or it can be something more broad. And you can email that feedback directly to psd.reprograms@vermont.gov. And you can also, there's a short survey you can provide us feedback with through the web form that is on the slides here. I'm not sure if you can directly click that link now, but these slides will be posted as well if they're not already. And yeah, we will review all the comments received, and we're going to be hoping to issue a recommendation for next steps before the session starts. You know, our policy recommendations will be accompanied by an equity impact assessment. So just any policy recommendations that we make, we now, whether it's this or anything else, we do an equity impact assessment using the tools developed by the Just Transitions Committee of the Vermont Climate Council. And so it's really a useful tool to make sure that we're you know, thinking more broadly than we have in the past, and trying to ensure we've engaged in angles and people that we haven't previously. And so we look forward to your continued comment. We will take all of that comment, and it is really valued. This discussion was great today. I actually wasn't sure what to expect from today, and so thank you all. I hope you enjoyed it as well and found it useful. And today specifically, you could give a short feedback survey on today's event. Just, we always want to improve. And if you're not already on our stakeholder list, we send out monthly newsletters with updates on where we're at. And so with that, it is noon, and thank you all for your feedback throughout the process and today. And I hope you have a great rest of the day.